Hey y'all, we are back in the garden today, not to discuss the success, but the current issues that we are dealing with in the garden. I meant it when I said we want to share the good and the bad, because if I've learned anything in my years of gardening, it's that you can do everything right and still get stumped, or you can do little to nothing and your plants thrive. The good thing is, when it comes to gardening, I believe there are no mistakes, only experiments. Before I get into how we're remedying these issues, let's take a look at what's failing in my garden and why. I first noticed our cucumbers struggling to thrive and eventually a few vines starting to wilt and die back. Now we can see it's happening to pretty much all of my cucumbers here on my trellis. Usually at this time of year, the harvest is constant. However, we haven't had too many cucumbers, so I think that's a telltale sign that something's going wrong and I might not be able to remedy the issue. So the interesting thing is there are no signs of pests or disease, at least from what I can see. So I'm wondering if it's just the location. This side of the garden is north facing, so they get less sun. So what I'm going to do is plant a few more cucumber plants because it's still early in the season. And if the new seedlings don't do well, then that tells me I might have to relocate them to a different part of the garden next season. Next on the list is the squash. A couple weeks ago, and there are still some that are thriving. However, I've noticed a few vines, such as this spaghetti squash, starting to die back. And I also noticed some of the squash is quite small. So it's undergrown, but ripening too early. If you notice, this vine also not looking too good. This one is acorn squash. So I'm actually dealing with something I've never had to deal with before, and I believe that is the squash vine borer. Some of the squash, perhaps like this acorn, are total goners, but it's hard for me to tell which squash belongs to which vine. So I think what I'm going to do is remove the sick plants or the sick vines and then see where that leads me. Here, my zucchini got the worst of it, I would say. And that's usually the sign of a vine borer. So the vine borer is a moth that lays her eggs on the leaves. The eggs hatch and they turn into these little worms or larvae, and they eventually eat away at the stem and eventually end up killing the plant. So comparing this zucchini to my other two zucchini, this one looks quite sick. Now again, I've never had to deal with the vine borer before, so this is all new to me. So what I'm actually doing is I am going to plan on replanting, or maybe just even getting rid of this zucchini, because I have two healthy plants. 1, 2. This one, I think I'm going to give it a week or so and then eventually pull it out. Lastly, I had another issue I've never dealt with in the past, but I've heard of. It's called bottom end rot, and it affects your tomatoes, specifically the Romas and the San Marzanos are susceptible, which are the exact plants that have been affected. As you can see, their bottoms are literally rotting, and that has to do with a calcium deficiency, whether the calcium in the soil is not enough or your plant, your tomato plant, is having a hard time absorbing the calcium due to inconsistencies in watering, which I believe is our issue because we've had a very, very wet early summer, a lot of rain. So I believe that's why we're having some issues with some of our tomatoes. These tomatoes, as you can see, are unaffected. It really only is our Romas and San Marzanos, which is unfortunate because that means we're going to have a much much smaller yield this year. So what I'm doing to try to fix these issues is I'm going to be watering more consistently every morning, which I pretty much have been doing, but I also decided to fertilize, give an extra boost of fertilizer to help with that. However, unfortunately, this is not an immediate fix. This does not happen overnight. So some of my aromas, those there are healthy. The ones right above it, not healthy. So this will take some time, but I'm really hoping that being consistent with watering, fertilizing more frequently will help remedy my bottom end rot. Every season can have different outcomes, even if you've done the same thing year after year. That is why I recommend having seedlings on standby for backup. You can either pick some up at a local nursery, or if you have the time and the space, grow more seedlings early summer just in case your first round of plants are not doing so well. I wish I had done this about a week or two ago when I started to see the signs of my plants dying, but I did end up sowing a few new seeds that I plan to eventually transplant in a few weeks in hopes to still achieve my harvest goal. It's about mid-July, so we still have a couple months left of warm weather, so I think the cucumber seedlings will do well, considering you only need about 60 days until the plant matures. The squash, on the other hand, can take around 90 days, but maybe we'll be blessed with a warm fall and the plants will do well. I do look for seed variations that have a shorter growing harvest time, because being in zone 6B, the cold weather does creep up on us sooner than expected sometimes. I always look forward to learning and problem solving in the garden. It's very practical for me to see the cause and effect of my actions and how I can modify what I do as the season progresses. I am going to keep a positive attitude, and I really hope that your garden is thriving this season. Thanks for following along, and as always, happy gardening.